We good? Good morning, all. Obviously working on some technical issues here this morning. Let's open with prayer. Lord Jesus, once again, we do thank you that you've given us an opportunity to come together and study your word, Lord. And again, we'd ask that you would open our hearts. You'd give us that which we have need of, that we might come away better equipped to serve you. For we ask it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Everybody here, and there's more people. We have the air conditioning going and so on and so forth. Some folks are having trouble hearing. So Brother Roger is trying to hook up the sound system here to help that situation as well. But until we get that actually going, for you brothers back there, if you want to just raise your hand or throw something at me or, whatever, I'll try to turn up the volume on my own voice box here as well and just speak a little louder until that time. Or feel free, there's empty seats up here, feel free to move forward for anybody who's having trouble hearing as well. So with that, we'll get started this morning. Some of you might remember that when I started this segment on the education piece and started taking some shots at our education system in this country, right? And particularly some of the promises we're making to our young people about what the education system is going to do for them, that I asked the parents not to get too mad at me too early in this thing because there was other stuff coming along. And indeed, we're still presenting some of that stuff. But in the interest of making sure that I kind of keep that thread going, I'm going to do a real quick review of some of the things we've talked about so far so we can kind of start making a little bit of transition. I don't want to just be in the business of bashing the educational system and saying everything is bad and, throw up your hands and say, woe is me, and nothing happens. I would like to be able to present some alternatives for folks to consider. Not that there is any one right answer, one size fits all kind of a thing, because there's a multitude of different situations with different folks. They have different desires, different goals, different circumstances, and so on and so forth. What I would like to do, though, is provide more information than I think you're going to get from the educational system itself, which would include your teachers and counselors in high school, your professors and counselors in college, right? And give you a little broader look at this thing we call education. Because I would submit to you it's much, much broader than a bunch of time in a classroom. There's a whole lot more to it than just sitting in the classroom and listening to somebody talk, like your Sunday school teacher, right? There's a lot more things to learn that need to be applied to this business of life planning we're talking about in this thing, right? So with that, we started looking at some of the statistics last week as to whether or not the educational system is providing to the students, to our young people, what they were promised. And like I say, we have about 2 million new bachelor's degrees are produced every year. About half of those folks either become unemployed or what we call underemployed, which means they have to wind up taking a job that didn't require a degree to begin with, right? And that could go on for a period of time. In fact, for some people, it might be permanent. On average, it takes about 7 months for any new college graduate to find a job, right? And some wind up taking this job that didn't require the degree to begin with and kind of settling in there and never really kind of moving on. They might, but they may not, right? And there were some other statistics here that about half of them go unemployed or underemployed. 53% of the employers report they can't find qualified non-managerial employees or starting level folks who are qualified to do the work that they want to do, right? 66 report difficulty in filling vacancies. 40% say they can't fill vacancies because of lack of skills. So my observation there was something is wrong. If our education system is not answering the need for the employers out there who have the jobs to offer, why is it we're telling our young people, you go get this nice degree, it's going to guarantee you a job? It's actually not happening in the workforce because the employers are complaining about it, right? So I did have the opportunity, I introduced this guy a couple of weeks ago, former Chancellor of the University of Missouri at Columbia for many years, a good friend of our family. I've discussed a bunch of these things with him just because our kids, right? And you might think on the surface that he was very much against that sort of thing, but he was kind of an open-minded guy and willing to talk about it a good bit. And this is one observation that kind of stuck with me, that the college curricula that they're selling to you, that's their product, the college is selling you a product, which is this degree. The reason you're motivated to buy it is because they promise it's going to get you this great job, right? But that curricula is designed to attract you, the student, perhaps more specifically, your parents who are going to pay for it, right? Based upon this promise that you're going to get a great job to get this degree, right? Or in some cases, if you're getting a student loan, it might be a government reviewer or somebody like that, right? So there's this fundamental disconnect between what the employers need or want and what is actually being taught in the schools. Universal. So I want to start talking about some of these issues, some of the things that we think where these disconnects lie. But the issue that I brought up last week was, well, so you want to go get this degree, you want to go get an education, if I can put that in quotes. You want to get prepared to move into the workforce. You want to be prepared for this life planning thing we keep talking about, right? But I think we also established that the main goal is that we're supposed to be growing up to be in the image of Christ, right? So how is it I do both of those? Well, where we left it last week was Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all these other things will be added to you. And I'm going to submit that includes the education in the broader sense, right? It might include a degree, it might include some classroom time, it might not, okay? Because his view of education is much broader than what the education system is offering you. They think education is defined by a piece of paper, that says you sat in a classroom for a certain period of time, right? And I'm submitting to you that it really is more than that. So what is it the employers are actually saying? Now I would stress here, if you want to go online and look at some of these statistics yourself, please do that. Please do that in the company of and with the help of your shepherds, right? Remember, we pointed out early on in this process that this is sort of geared to the young people, but it can apply to this old folks as well. But the young people are provided 3 shepherds, right, to give them advice and counsel. Dad, the family shepherd, pastor shepherd of the congregation, and Jesus Christ, the good shepherd. Those 3 are supposed to be in alignment, right? And we've talked about how if those 3 are in alignment, there are no wrong answers for you young folks, right? And that's where you're supposed to be getting your counsel. So, but Brother Branham also said that Satan was the author of education. So what is he trying to accomplish? He's trying to separate you from that line of counseling. He's trying to separate you from God in any way he can, right? And he's got a couple of ways to do it. That's the main one. If he can separate you from or destroy your confidence in that particular line of counseling, those 3 shepherds, that's one. The other is he'll stand right in front of the classroom in the form of a professor and tell you that everything in that Bible is false. They'll teach you everything they can about discrediting the Word of God, okay? And they'll put you in an environment like this college environment we talked about that is just fraught with everything you can think of that's anti-God, okay? The entire culture is set up to accommodate the LGBT, ABCD, whatever it is. They add a new letter every other week movement, or they get you involved in the drunken parties, or they get you involved in all kinds of things. There's 1,000 different things that can steer you astray in the college campus environment. So there are a lot of different ways that Satan might try to do that, but he's trying to separate you from God as his ultimate goal, right? And so he'll try to wrap it up in this thing we call education. Whereas there are a lot of folks today who would tell you that we don't have education in this country anymore at all. It's actually indoctrination. And from a social perspective, I got to agree with them. Now, for some of the more technical disciplines, like I say, I pick on my own profession, like here a little bit, but in the engineering world, it's a little harder to measure numbers, right? Somebody like an accountant, perhaps, or a mathematician, or a physicist, or something like that. It's a little harder for the devil to tell you that 2 + 2 does not equal 4, right? But as we saw last week, the colleges are requiring you to take these general education courses where the devil can step in there and say, oh yeah, that Bible thing, forget about that. And anybody that told you that thing was true, forget about them too. So these are the kinds of things I'm just trying to highlight. So like I say, you can find all kinds of different statistics out there. And so I would encourage you to look at these things in the company with your shepherds and pay particular attention to what they're measuring. So in this particular case, these are some questions that were posed to some employers by this outfit called the Dardis Academy that did this survey. And this is the number of employers who listed this particular skill, I might actually go so far as to call it a trait, a personality trait as well, right, as their number 1 most important thing, right? And what I'd like to point out here is that it starts out with problem solving. Then they want good learners, people who can pick up new tasks easily. They want to be analytical, want you to have a good level head on your shoulder. You can think these things through when you're given a task to do something, right? We talked about the importance of communications, both orally and in writing. We're talking about that some more. And notice these are the number of people who picked that as the number one priority, right? So there's going to be some other numbers in here that may suggest they're different, but my point here is not to drive home a particular number. I'm trying to talk about a more general discussion as to whether or not the education system is providing our young people, actually delivering to them what's been promised, right? And look at what the employers actually want to see at the other end. So however you go about your life planning process, whether that includes a degree or classroom or whatever, right? What is it ultimately that that employer wants to see? And these are his priorities, right? Generally, problem solving being at the top. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I hope to give you sort of a practical example. But we looked at this chart last week as well. I'd like to just remind you the last paragraph. Today's employers place high value on soft skills, such as critical thinking, attention, and communications. And most employers respond to experience more than coursework or grades. So you can also find charts in there that shows they don't care about what college you went to. They don't care really about what you majored in necessarily. They don't care what your GPA was. What they care about is whether or not you can do this job that they're trying to hire you for, right? And to some extent, how much retraining or training of their own, OJT, they call it job training, they're going to have to provide. Many of them are opting to do that anyway because they're seeing it's not coming out of the colleges. They just opt to say, forget about your so-called education, I'm going to train you on the job when I hire you, right? So I thought we'd talk a little bit today about what are the soft skills. And there's a lot of them. I'm just going to kind of hit the high spots today, and I would encourage you to look through some of that stuff online as well. But this is an outfit, Cengage, I guess it is, the way you pronounce that, a survey. Was done of hiring managers and human resource professionals, employers. It says employers want employees who have soft skills as well as technical expertise. What's more, they're having difficulty finding candidates who possess these soft skills. Specifically, I'm going to talk about what they call the top 5, and this is from this outfit called collegerecruiter.com, okay? So at the top of their list was this ability to listen, right? And so what I'd like you to do is, as we go through this list, think about it in the context of, did I learn this in school or not? Did the education system actually provide me this skill or not? Either in high school or college or whatever, right? So it says the most in-demand skill was the ability to listen. 74% of employers said this was a talent that they valued. Not necessarily the number one, but what they valued. It says, it doesn't sound hard to do, but research shows that a whopping 90% of people are not good listeners. We spend far too much time practicing the art of talking and not enough time learning to really listen. Good listeners can discern the hidden meaning versus the literal meaning. For instance, a lot of communication lies in the tone, emotional cues, and body language of the speaker. We go into a lot of detail on that if you wanted to. But my question is, why aren't we doing this in school? Right? This business of wearing the mask has been criticized as well just because of its impact on your ability to communicate. Because people can't see facial expressions. They can't hear you very well a lot of times, right? Tonal expressions and things like that. So it says to be an effective listener, you must, as they say, read between the lines. Listen for the tone of voice and pick up on nonverbal cues, which involves your full attention. Effective listeners also gain understanding versus simply getting an answer to a question. Many people stop listening after they think they've gotten the answer they want, but fail to truly understand the full meaning. Again, this requires attentiveness, and in some cases, asking for clarification and more information. Other attributes of a good listener are letting the speaker finish without interrupting and waiting for the speaker to finish before formulating a reply in your mind and listening with an open mind. There is a key difference between hearing and actually listening. Now you may say to me, Brother Ken, I'm a high schooler. I've been in school for 12 years, and that's all I've done is listen. You know, I sat in the classroom and had somebody yak at me for 12 years, right? So absolutely, the education system would say, we are training them to do this, because that's what they do. And I'm going, I think I would challenge that statement, frankly, right? Yes, we have the students sit down in the classroom and be still so we can yak at them, right? But have we actually told them why and how to be a good listener? The old saying goes, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth so you can listen twice as much as you talk, right? Have we actually trained our students to listen, comprehend, understand? Now, I think you can start an argument with an educator on this real quick, because they'll give you a lecture on something to give you a test and see if you actually remembered or comprehended or something like that, right? They say, well, there are the results. I'm going to tell you, that's an acceptable result in an academic environment, perhaps, when what you're trying to measure is, do you remember what I told you last week, right? As opposed to an employer who is saying, I told you to do task X, did you understand it and do it correctly, right? Those are kind of two different realms. And the ability to actually listen, make the eye contact, be totally attentive to the person who's talking to you and have this exchange is a skill that's not all that common in the workplace nowadays, okay? And I say, why? Why is our educational system not doing that? Here's a good quote you might have heard from Alan Greenspan. It says, I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. Let that one soak in for a second. You know, some people can go away with different impressions of what was said. Okay? Why is that? One listened and the other one heard, right? So how well can we train our young people up to do that? It needs to be being done, right? And I'm going to submit to you that this doesn't just apply to an academic environment. It doesn't just apply to a work environment. This applies to the Christian walk as well, right? If you're given the opportunity to share with somebody, to talk to somebody, and so on and so forth, you need to be an effective listener and an effective communicator. We'll talk about that next. So this number 2 soft skill is good communication skills. So this goes hand in hand with listening. Most problems in the workplace stem from poor communication, which is why employers place a high value on this skill. In today's digital age, this means solid writing and speaking skills, both in person and over the web with video conferencing and email. So I can give you a great example of that one. I mean, I do a lot of MS Teams and Zoom, and Canadians use this other web thing. I can't remember what the name of that thing is. A lot of time for video conferencing for a one-on-one, particularly after this COVID thing, right? When Brother Mike asked me to stand up the Sunday school class again and folks said they want to start streaming it, I'm going, I don't think I know how to do that. So Sister Sarah, fortunately, was very familiar with doing that, stood it all up for us, and then she trained up Sister Grace, you know, to be her backup. So I got some of the best in the country helping me with this thing, right? Or I'd be kind of up a creek, right? But take that example, and let's assume that this was a business now, and my business depended upon the ability to stream, right? Those two folks have become some of my most valuable employees, right? Is it because they have a degree in IT? Well, I think one of them does, okay? But this kind of a skill can be obtained without that, right? And you become the most valuable person there is when you solve the boss's problem, okay? It's been said in the Navy we call your annual performance evaluation a fitness report, but it's often been said that the best way to get a good evaluation is to write your boss's evaluation, right? When you can do something that is so positive, so significant, it shows up in his evaluation, guess what? It's going to show up in yours, and you're going to get some benefit from it, right? So you need to be able to understand how to do that. And with today's technology, as it changes every other week, right? It's good to keep up with that kind of thing. It says clarity, grammar, spelling, enunciation, and organization all play important roles in effective communication. You can begin demonstrating these skills with your cover letter and resume, and of course during your interview. Let me give you an example of the importance of grammar. Okay? Let's eat grandma. No, you forgot a comma. If you put the comma in the right place, it's let's eat grandma. Right? So you might say, well, that's kind of a silly example. I will tell you, if you're in the legal world, that could have been a multi-million-dollar mistake. Okay? Because particularly writing contracts, people are making agreements, and so on and so forth, you better be able to make this communication clear. So you might say, well, hey, the education system does that for us. You have to study English, and you have to write papers and do things like that, and so on. And I would concede that yes, that is probably true. This one maybe could be improved upon as well, because I'm one of those guys that been hiring and firing for almost 40 years now, mostly engineers. A lot of those guys come to me with resumes. You go, this guy ever take a course in English? What's up with this? I'm surprised he can spell his own name. So, and that goes along with attention to detail. It says this is defined as the ability to achieve thoroughness and accuracy when accomplishing a task. Again, on the surface, this doesn't sound that hard to achieve. However, being thorough and accurate involves planning, organization, and the ability to break down a big project into manageable steps. To demonstrate this skill, come to interviews prepared with examples of assignments or work that involves thoroughness and accuracy. And a word to the wise, don't have misspellings in your resume. Okay? I've seen it 1,000 times. But we talked about this earlier for the young folks. If you're going to apply for something, right, later on, it's going to help you because they're really looking for experience. It's going to help you if you can show things that you've done in the past, whether it be for another employer, whether it be for an extracurricular activity, whether it's been for mom and dad, right, that requires you to take on some responsibility, shoulder it, get it done, and get it done correctly, right? Examples like that are always good. But I will say that this is not something that's limited to young people either. Us old folks have to pay attention to this all our life, right? And it's a skill that needs to be honed all the time. I've seen this too. You got to stand up for the presentation and contradict themselves right in the middle of the presentation because they didn't have the attention to detail, right? So here's another big one. Time management. You mean today is Monday? Oh, my deadline was Friday? Oops, right? This is a big one. It says no matter the industry, being efficient and meeting deadlines are important to a company's overall performance. An employee who can manage multiple projects at a time, keep track of deadlines, and use time resourcefully is a valuable asset and allows managers to focus on more important tasks than micromanaging every employee. Start demonstrating this skill by showing up on time for interviews and then discuss projects that involve successful time management. So there's a little piece of a segment we'll do here later on that I think we'll probably wind up this series with a segment on marriage, right, and courting and so on and so forth, and some of the differences between men and women. Believe it or not, there are some. That's another thing that the education system was trying to tell you is not true anymore. But there are differences between guys and gals, okay? And it's not limited just to the physiological differences. It's the way they think as well. And frankly, the ladies are better equipped at multitasking than the guys are. I'll just leave it at that for now. But the point is, you do need to understand how to multitask, take on more than one task at a time and manage the time, right? And you might say, well, we are training our young people to do that because how many folks ever have more homework than you think you can get done on time, right? And I would say maybe, but it's an indirect kind of approach. It's like throwing somebody in the water and saying learn to swim, right? How many people have had formal courses in high school on how to prioritize and manage your time? How many have had it in college? A little story from the Navy once again. There's this ensign, and ensign is the lowest ranking officer in the Navy. Okay, so fresh caught out of school, he shows up on the ship for his first shipboard duty, right? And he has his first meeting with the XO, executive officer, is number 2 in command. And he's the guy who normally makes all the assignments, right? So he welcomes the guy aboard, gives him his task list and everything he's supposed to accomplish every day, right? The guy goes away and dutifully looks this thing over. He's going, oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff here. So he sits down and does a little analysis, not like a time and motion thing, to figure out how much time it's going to take him to do this stuff. And he goes back and he knocks on the XO's door. Says, sir, can I talk to you? Sure, come on in. So he sits down and he goes, I've analyzed this task list you gave me, and I've tried to figure out how much time it would take me to do each one of these tasks. And if I was going to do every one of these every day, it's going to take me 23 and a half hours per day to get all this stuff done. And the XO goes, really, let me see that analysis. So he looks it over and he goes, you're absolutely right, Ensign. I've made a mistake. I left something off. So he added another task to the list and handed it back to him and says, now get out of my office. Okay? This is one of the realities of life, frankly. There's more to do and you'll never have time to do it. So this is something that actually does get trained pretty heavily at the Naval Academy, but that's a service school, right? I don't think I would put it in the same category as other schools because you got your regular class load, you got all your military training, and they intentionally try to load you up with this impossible list of things to do, right? Just to see how many of them you will drop and leave on the and you get that pounded into you for 4 years. But I don't see that in the civilian schools necessarily, other than trying to manage a course load, right? Naval Academy, an average course load was like 19 hours a year. The most I did was 23. And most folks are somewhere between the 19 and 21 hours per semester, sort of a class load, right? So the key is you have to learn to prioritize those things that are expected of you, right? And I don't think we give enough formal training on that sort of thing. The last one is this thing they call critical thinking and problem solving. It says every job comes with its own set of challenges and unexpected setbacks. how you handle them. Companies want employees who can objectively examine information and determine the best way to solve the problems. That includes all the things we talked about before, including this whole prioritization thing. I'm going to try to give you a practical example here in a second as well. So the valuable employee is one who can find creative solutions to problems and act instead of being stymied by obstacles. Come to interviews prepared to provide examples of how you've successfully handled problems or implemented solutions. So I thought I'd give you a little example this morning, not to be dramatic or anything, but something that I've personally dealt with in about the last year and a half or something like that. But a summary of these top 5, and there are more. If you want to go look at this stuff, a summary of the top 5 looks like this. And my point is, how many courses in high school or in college are specifically designed to teach you these things? Like I say, there are many of them that can claim, I'm going to say, an indirect influence on you, like learning to manage your course load, to prioritize your time and time management and stuff like that. I'm going to say life planning is a little more than that, right? And I'm going to say that our education system falls short. And that's not just me talking, that's all the employers that are surveyed are talking, that the students who come out are not prepared to do these things, right? So again, just kind of a case study I was going to give you here today on a situation I had to deal with, like I say, about a year and a half ago, that I think sort of illustrates this stuff. Not that you're going to have to deal with something quite of this magnitude or this dramatic, but I wanted to kind of show and illustrate how an employer is going to respond to some of these unexpected issues that come up, and the value that is gleaned by the employees for their ability to respond to them. So this thing is called an aerostat. We call it basically a blimp on a string. Okay, its purpose is for what they call persistent surveillance. You can put different kinds of payloads under it, put it up in the air, and it can stay there for a very long time. This particular one is 39 meters long, about 42 yards, just shy of half a football field in length, 10 meters in diameter. The top of this tail fin stands approximately 100 feet in the air. We've got about 100,000 cubic feet of helium in it at the cost of $1 per cubic foot. So it's a fairly expensive operation. This particular one went about $3.5 million to try to get this thing together. You'll notice that this is a demonstration I was supposed to do a year ago, last October, in California. This is the fill hose we use for inflation. It's a point that will become important a little later. But this is in the process of the inflation process. You lay this thing out here on this tarp so you don't punch holes in it with the rocks and sticks on the ground. You start pumping it full of helium, and when it gets up to a certain level, you kind of nudge it over the platform and get it all tied down. So it's moored to the platform here with these mooring lines. We're still just finishing up the inflation process, and it's attached with this nose cone right here. It's a probe that goes into this attachment device, right? The step supposed to take place after that is where these weights are. You take these weights off and you put these railings underneath it to hang the payload on, and then you attach the tether to it, which holds it to the ground, okay? And the tether takes all the data from the sensors and sends it down the tether to a ground control station, right? So we're in the midst of getting this thing inflated. We got to this point, the crew broke for lunch, okay? Left one person there to watch it just for safety. While we're gone, I went like maybe 2 miles down the road to this little hole-in-the-wall restaurant for lunch. Just sat down with my meal, and I get a phone call. The balloon is broken away. This is also an aerostat. This is the same aerostat, actually, in the worst possible condition you can imagine for one, because we had not yet attached the tether, right? We had a little dust devil come through the site. If you're familiar with the dust devil, it's like this little bitty miniature tornado. Came through, created an updraft, broke all the mooring lines. And so the only thing that's holding this thing to the ground right now, it's hard to see in this picture, is this little attachment device in the nose cone. But the tail of it flipped up, it fell over backwards, and then rotated 180 degrees, okay? So it's like taking your wrist and bending it back this way, right? And completely destroyed the nose cone. So the only thing that's holding it to the mast is this little pin, okay? We also happen to be located about 10 miles from Los Angeles International Airport, underneath what's known as their Class Bravo airspace, right? Controlled airspace for all the traffic. So if you have any idea of how much traffic is coming into and out of LAX, it's a lot. And if this thing gets away from us, it's floating off into Never Never Land, right? In the way of all the commercial jetliners that are coming and going. I'm the guy that's in contact with the air traffic controllers because this thing is going to be flying. We had to have permission to use the airspace to begin with. I've already reported an emergency, and if it gets away from us, they're going to shut down LAX. And we make it to the front page of the LA Times, the 6 o'clock news on CNN, and so on and so forth. Some of the attention you basically don't want, right? But our problem is here, this is, again, the worst possible situation for an aerostat. You say, well, let's take the helium out of it. Okay. There are 2 ports that are designed into it to evacuate the helium when you're deflating it, to take it down, right? They're located right here, one on each side. And if you notice, helium rises, so it's all up in the tail. So I can open those valves. They're actually electric valves. We hadn't installed the electric distribution system yet, so we can't even open the valves. But even if I could, the bulk of the helium is up here. This is now more than 150 feet in the air, probably, right? I have no way to get a hold of it to bring it down. So, Houston, we have a problem. Okay, we're now in the problem-solving business. Okay, so I just wanted to give you this example as one of these problem-solving issues. Every employer has them. He may not have ones quite this dramatic, but he has them, and he has them on a daily basis. Things happen that you don't expect, right? And you're expecting your crew, your employees, to step up to the plate and solve the problem somehow. And there may not be an instruction manual, an operator's manual, even an emergency procedure for something like this, right? So I'll also point out I had a crew of 10, okay, on the ground there. Of those, we had 2 degrees. Mine, one other guy, one of the mid-grade guys, had been a former Army MP, military policeman. He'd gotten out, went to Afghanistan, flew aerostats for a little while, but got a master's degree in finance, was working on a PhD in finance. This much value in this particular situation, okay? Approximately that much, right? I had 4 experienced aerostat operators, and the rest of them were green as grass. Never seen an aerostat before in their life, okay? And we got to solve this problem, okay? So after a great deal of time, it took us over 2 days to get this thing back on the ground, all right? And we worked literally around the clock to do it. Myself and about four others had one stretch, and then we did 32 hours straight without sleep, trying to get this thing on the ground. But this guy with the finance degree, I might mention, was also a former football player, big guy, big, strong guy. And after many, many attempts, we finally figured out, oh, by the way, when this problem presents itself, your degree doesn't matter, your grades don't matter, right? The only thing that matters is whether or not you have any experience you can bring to the table for this thing and how well you can communicate it to the rest of the team. This now becomes a team sport. Your rank doesn't matter. I'm in charge of this thing, okay? But I had a lot of other guys over here who are smarter than me on the actual mechanics of the aerostat system itself, right? So I had to listen to them. They had to listen to me about other constraints we got going on, like dealing with the air traffic controllers, dealing with the outfit that owns this land that we're on right here, and the attention that we're getting, and so on and so forth, right? Anyway, this guy with a finance degree finally gets this bright idea to take a big wrench and duct tape it to a rope, right? And after many attempts, he found one of these loops here that still existed where a shackle hadn't broken, and he heaved this thing up there and got it through that loop. Okay, so we got one line on it, and we can start trying to get the tail back on the ground to get control of it, so that if that nose cone connection failed, we might have some way to keep this thing from floating off into Never Never Land, right? So obviously we tied it off to a pickup truck here, but we can't put too much strain on it because this thing lifts about 7,000 pounds, okay? And the mooring lines have already broken, and there were 16 of them before. Now I have one attached, right? So we've got to be very careful about how we're getting the tail down on this thing, try to get some helium out of it. After probably 18, 20 hours, we finally did manage to get it down on the ground. It's hard to see in this picture because of the light. But I got a big forklift right here we'd use to raise the forks way up here and get a hold of some of those lines and then pull down on them with the forks. And again, we had to do it slowly because you have to let some of this helium escape. When we got to this point, we got all of the helium out that we could. And this thing is now, the top of the balloon is probably 50 feet in the air at this point, right? I've got a man lift that can reach about 30. So we did have this bright idea. I would also point out my deputy on this project was my son, Justin. and one of those guys as green as grass, never seen an aerostat before, was Isaac. I took him out there as a temporary guy to help us with this thing, right? And then we had another guy on the side. His name was Stuart Hamilton. No relation. It caused a little bit of confusion. We had 4 Hamiltons on the site. But Justin came with the idea of getting on the man lift and taking this valve apart and stuffing a piece of wood in it. So we got that done, right? A little bit hazardous, but here's some of the guys on the man lift. And this is Justin here trying to figure out how to get the rest of this helium out of there. We found a piece of aluminum angle about 12 feet long. We duct taped my folding knife to it, right? And he got up there on the man lift and reached up here on top and just started cutting slashes in the top of the balloon, right? The envelope, they call it, officially it's called an envelope. We call it either the balloon or the bag. Probably worth about $200,000, but we had to destroy it to get it down. So he's cutting these holes in it up here. We also got this bright idea. This is a great one, I thought. I went to Home Depot and bought this leaf blower. Okay, hard to see from this picture, but there's a fitting on the end of it right here. That fitting is the fitting that goes into the fill port when we're inflating it, right? So we cut that off, and we jury-rigged it onto this leaf blower with duct tape. That's white duct tape right there, right, on the intake side of it. And we went up and attached that fitting to the fill port, and then plugged it in and tried to suck the helium back out the other way with a leaf blower. After some time, we actually did get it inflated or deflated, and that's kind of what it looks like hanging there on the mast. The problem is it's backwards. This is supposed to be on the other side of the mast. It's like this thing, right? And this nose cone is the only thing that's holding it up there right now still. The only way to get that loose is to reach inside that mangled bunch of metal in there. All of these struts on the bottom side here were broken. Had all these cables, again, hard to see in here, they're hanging in there. The only way to get that loose is to physically reach inside there and pull a pin. Okay, now, I promised the crew that everybody got to go home with the same number of body parts they showed up with, okay? And we thought there was a high risk if somebody tries to reach in there and do that. When this is about 1,500 pounds worth of fabric, it's hanging on it right here. And that thing comes falling down. It's probably going to cut somebody's hand off or break an arm or something. Plus, it get hung up on the mast and turn the whole platform over, right, as it came down. So, another problem. We're still in problem-solving mode, right? And again, very much a team sport. So, Justin and Stu went back up on the man lift, and we decided to tie 2 ropes to the thing, one on this side of the mast and one on the other side of the mast. And as you can see, we connected one to the pickup truck. Again, these pictures are hard to see with the light on this side. You see the line going up here, another line coming this way to a forklift back here. And the idea was the truck will start pulling and the forklift will hold, and we'll try to keep the thing, get the thing coming down in a controlled fashion. It normally is raised and lowered with hydraulics. But again, we've got the weight on the wrong side of it here. And the fear was if it starts down with a hydraulic system and all that weight is added to it, it's going to blow the lines. And it's going to come crashing down on the platform and destroy everything. So we wanted a controlled descent for this thing. Right? And so this is kind of a ticklish operation, but we did get it done. I got a video of this, but you can see that the pickup has pulled. The line is now slack. It's on its way down, but the line to the forklift is taut, and it's controlling it to come down so we don't hurt anybody or any of the equipment, right? Once we get it on the ground, we now have a lot of tension on this thing because it pulled this whole bag forward like that. We still can't get the nose cone out of the attachment here. So we wind up cutting it loose. It's actually laced to these little tabs up here. Some of you might remember or recognize this guy. That's Isaac up there helping to cut that thing loose, right? To get the tension off of it, so we can get it loose. We finally did get it cut loose, so we can start examining it to see what it would actually take to get the nose cone separated from it. And ultimately, we did get the entire bag taken off of it and got the nose cone off without it hurting anybody. Okay, so. And of course, there was a victory lap when we were done. We tried to express our appreciation to the crew for all the risk. Literally, for 3 days, we had probably 4 different folks at different times that literally risked life and limb to get this thing back on the ground. Okay. Again, there was no instruction manual, no emergency procedures, we had to come up with this as we went, right? And try to keep from hurting people or hurting equipment. Okay. And so this became sort of famous. Zach was another one of those guys that was green as grass, but he and Isaac worked together on this thing quite a lot. And so we took him out of this big seafood restaurant, and this was sort of their grand thing on the menu. So they decided they were going to split it. Both of those guys can put away a fair amount of groceries, oh, by the way, okay? But this was bigger than both of them. So we teach them about this a good bit. But anyway, the point of why do I share that with you? Well, I just wanted to point out the value of at least these traits along with a whole bunch more, right? This is why employers are looking for the so-called soft skills, because I will tell you, there was none of us out there that had formal training on any of this stuff, okay? Didn't exist. You got to pull these ideas out of your hip pocket, and you got to discuss them. You got to be able to communicate them, right? You got to discuss them with the rest of the team. And there are serious consequences here for some of this. Now, depending on where you go in your profession, you may or may not have this sort of hardware risk, right? But nowadays, there are huge software risks out there. I mean, I got a son who writes software that patches up security software for banks. When a hacker tries to hack into a bank and stuff like that, he detects that stuff and figures out if there's a problem, then fixes it, right? So you can imagine the risk on the software side if somebody did get in and start messing with your bank account, right? There are thousands of these things, and not necessarily on such a dramatic scale. But I think everybody here that works a job would be able to tell you that there are those things that come up that were never planned, never expected, but have to be fixed, right? And I don't think we can expect the education system to give you formal training on each and every one of those little cases. That's not what it's about. It's a broader thing. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of looking at the world, if you will, right? And where you fit in it with that particular team. So the idea, once again, is if you're doing this in the broader context of education, and I'm including in that, oh, by the way, our quest to become in the image of Christ, right? Because you would be very surprised, I think, and I think I can see folks who would raise their hand on this one, is that there are folks who will rally around you in an emergency like that just because they know that you're a Christian, right? I'll tell you, in this particular case, I had 10 people on the ground, and I could tell you that there was one guy who decided he was going to be whining and complaining the whole time, right? And it took about that long for the team to recognize exactly who they could count on and who they couldn't, right? But if I was representing the company, which I was, as sort of the employee, I can tell you the other 9 of them, I'd sign them up for any job I had in the future, any single one, and I didn't care about their degree. Don't care about their degree today. I don't care about their training and background. Some of them had military backgrounds, okay? I don't even care about that. What I saw was that soft skill. They wanted to step up to the plate, go 32 hours without sleep if necessary, okay? Give them 2 hours with a nap time and back on the job until we got the thing done. Those are the kinds of people we're looking, the kinds of skills we're looking for, are stepping up and saying, I'm not seeing that kind of thing coming out of our education system. So where do you get it? I think it begins at home, right? And I think it's more valuable. What you're getting at home is more valuable than what you get in the education system in a lot of cases, right? It can be the very simplest of things, like doing your chores. You know, I know young people want to smack me about now, but there's a reason for those kinds of things that you're being assigned to do by your parents, right? And it's not just to make your life miserable, right? Why are you going to be responsible to clean your room or take out the trash or sweep the floor or whatever it is? You know, there's something you're being assigned to do, and you're being assigned to do that because you're being taught to be counted upon to do something, right? So with that, next week, I want to give you some practical examples about comparing some career paths, if you will, for those who had degrees and those who did not have degrees, and see where that goes. Again, I'm not here to influence you one way or the other. Those shepherds we talked about, Dad the family shepherd, pastor shepherd of the congregation, Jesus Christ, those are the ones who are responsible, not your Sunday school teacher, right? So I would ask you to have these discussions with your shepherds and make some plans accordingly. Any questions on that? It's a little different today. I'm going to try to give you a little bit more practical stuff instead of just kind of stand up here and complaining about the education system. Right? Let's close with prayer. Lord Jesus, we do thank you once again that you've given us your word, and it is something that we can count on, Lord. It is the only absolute that we have to count upon, and your example is the only absolute that we have to compare ourselves to, Lord. These young people are making these life-changing decisions. life-defining decisions, that they remember to put you first in all of those planning processes, and to stay aligned with those shepherds so that those decisions that they make would be the proper ones in your context of the overall value of education and life planning. We ask, Lord, once again that you would open the Word to us, open our hearts to the Word as it's broken to us from the pulpit this morning, that we might come away better equipped to serve you. For we ask it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ.